Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Mobile Domination Podcast. My name is Dan Hafner. I am your host here today. I am super excited for an awesome episode. We are going to be talking with a special guest of mine I invited onto the show here. It's very interesting. He does literally almost the same thing that we do here at Dapper Mobile Apps and Mobile Domination. But we were just talking before we started recording here. There is plenty of room out there in the world for people to promote and talk with their competitors. We don't have to be a bunch of cutthroats. We can all get along and sing kumbaya. So I'm super excited to talk to him. I've told you guys a lot, if you're in our Facebook group at all, about the power, the sheer power and awesomeness of what we call this no code technology. And Mark is an expert in this area. So without any further ado, let's welcome on to the show. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on this show, Daniel.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess if I messed up the intro, his name's Mark Pillar.
Mark
He is
Pillar.
he is the founder of a company called Backendless. This has nothing to do with not having an actual bottom. It actually has things to do with technology. So Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Backendless. Give us the spiel.
Sure. So Mark Pillar, founder and CEO of Backendless. This is my second startup. Well, it's no longer a startup. We've been doing it for the past 10 years. It was a pivot from another company that I had at the time when Backendless was born. I started my entrepreneurship career in 2003. It was started with a New Year's resolution when it was just me. I had a full-time job, family, and I said, look, I'm going to spend a couple of hours every single day working on something cool. And 6 months later, I had a product. So that's how, and I still had a full-time job. So that's how my entrepreneurship started. I had my first sale a month after we released the product, which was super exciting. And it was 2003. And that sale was to National Rifle Association. Against all odds, I had no idea that, like NRA, they just licensed our stuff. That was pretty cool. So Backendless was born really as a pivot, because prior to that, we were focusing on connectivity between rich internet, RIA was the term at that time, rich internet applications. And it was a realm of technologies such as Adobe Flash, Flex, Microsoft Silverlight, Ajax came along the way. And we were connecting all those technologies with various backend systems such as Java, .NET, PHP, Ruby, you name it. So, but primarily it was Flex. So when Apple, Steve Jobs specifically came out and said, look, Flash is not going to run on iPhones. Okay. That was kind of the early wording for us that, Flex will suffer eventually. And it did. So we had this fantastic product that really could connect anything to anything. And with Flex kind of going to nowhere, we needed to do something. And then the idea was, we're going to take this fantastic integration product, put it in the cloud, and turn it into a universal backend. Okay. And that's how Backendless was born. The vision at that time, and it still is true, was to provide a platform for anyone who wants to build an application, a complete A to Z, front end, back end, fully integrated. And most importantly, because at that time, the mindset, think about the mindset. So I'm a Java developer working on large enterprise projects. Scalability was like super expensive, and it still is.
Yeah.
Like you build something out, you put it out there. I used to work at American Airlines Sabre reservation system that is just getting huge traffic, and of course, you put something out there and it starts getting bombarded with requests. Things go down. So scalability is something very expensive, and we just wanted to kind of provide scalability out of the box, just as a part of the service, where you don't have to even worry about adding more servers or hiring super expensive consultants to fix your scalability. So that was kind of the mission that I set for our people, saying, guys, this is what we're going to do. One user or a million users, same response time. That's has to be our promise. So we started working on the back end because that was a harder problem to solve, but thinking that front end the UI development facility of the platform will come later. And sure enough, took us some time to get to the point where we could truly scale to very high numbers. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of transactions per minute, and without any degradations of performance. And at that time, I said, okay, it scales really, really well. We can, by adding servers on our side for our large cloud installation, we can scale infinitely. And then that's when we started working on the UI development capability of the platform. So it's kind of, I covered a lot of different things, but where we are today,
Interesting.
where we are today, it's Backendless is, we call it visual application development platform. Visual primarily because you can build apps visually. We go with no code to the extreme where you can literally describe any kind of logic that runs on the client side and on the server side without writing a single line of code. But if you are a developer, and be it a backend developer that needs to crank out API services, or if you need to build a native app with Android, iOS, or JavaScript, or .NET, Flutter, you name it, we provide SDKs where you can build your UIs, build your apps natively, and connect to us strictly as the backend. So there is a kind of two audiences as far as the users of Backendless today: developers writing their technologies, writing their applications, consuming us as the backend, and other group of developers, primarily no coders, but there are a lot of developers who prefer to do it visually, that just build end-to-end applications within Backendless.
You're right. A lot of different ways we can go there. That's super interesting. So does your software integrate with other no code builders?
Yes. In fact,
holy shit, that's cool.
So I don't know. Well, we said Backendless, so clearly everyone can go to backendless.com. If you go to backendless.com, one of the menus at the top is going to say developers. And when you click on that, it's going to open up a drop-down list, and there's going to be a section called integrations. And in there, we published guides to the majority of most well-known UI development systems. And in there, you will find Bubble, Wix, Adalo, AppGyver, and some others. Well,
yeah,
I don't want to offend anyone smaller in comparison. But the cool thing about Backendless is when you build your backend in Backendless, and you do it all visually, like you can create your schema, you can create relationships between the entities, and you have file system, you get authentication and authorization mechanisms, so you can log in with password, email and password, or phone number, Apple login, social login. So what it supports 30 different authentication mechanisms. Everything is accessible via API. So there is a clear separation of responsibilities between the backend and the front end in Backendless. Like for instance, with Bubble, whenever you build UI in Bubble and you created your collections in the backend and so on, you do not get API to your backend. Requests are being sent, things are happening in the backend, HTML comes back. So you cannot talk to Bubble just as the backend because it's all one kind of tightly integrated together. With Backendless, it is different. Backend is separated and it has its own APIs. And by doing so, you can build UI in any of the UI development systems and connect to Backendless through the APIs. In fact, when you build UIs in Backendless, integration is super simple. It's just one visual block, to save something in the database or to handle login or user registration. Those visual blocks, in turn, use the APIs that we publish for ourselves and for the rest of the world. So with that, it becomes quite easy to integrate Backendless into pretty much anything that is out there.
That's super cool. And if any of you who might be lost in the conversation at this point, which is, it's easy to have when you see words like API and things like that. Why is this important? Because you said something earlier that I kind of want to tie back into, right? Like the ability to scale out of the box is so incredible with no code tools, right? Like I tell people that come to me with app ideas all the time, and they might not have ever heard about no code builders. They're like, oh, what's that? Right? I'm like, it literally gives you the ability to compete with a giant in your industry overnight. And that's just not hyperbole. That's actual fact. I've seen it happen, right?
Yeah.
So why is this, especially when it comes to a no code solution, especially with what you guys do, why is that so important out of the box?
It is important because scalability cannot be an afterthought. If you build your application, and a lot of startups, let's focus on the functionality, let's just get it out there in front of the users. Let's call it, pilot, or that's going to be our MVP. And if you don't think about scalability as a part of your architecture early on, more than likely, and it's better be sooner than later. You will be either doing a lot of re-architecturing and refactoring, or you could be doing a complete rewrite. The painful part of this is that if your app, if your MVP or pilot starts getting traction early on, and you start getting users registering and coming to your system, then switching gears underneath while the app is live, in order to get to the point where scalability becomes part of your application, is a very expensive process. It's sort of like doing, a hard change operation without, stopping hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. So as a result, we believe that getting that scalability, and with Backendless, you get it out of the box early on, and literally just from the moment when you create an app in Backendless is critical, because it is already part of the architecture when you build an app with us. Of course, since we give complete freedom to design your schema any way you want to, it's very easy to get to the point where it will not perform that well. For instance, we see people coming to the technology, and that's probably one of the kind of side effects of working with no-code crowd. People may not have a lot of experience or any experience, and they just like, oh, I have a database. Let me start creating the schema. And sooner or later, you have a table that has like 150 different columns. They just throw everything in there. And of course, the table grows and you start doing queries and loading all the data. And of course, the performance of that will not be ideal, because it's still, still needs to go through a lot of columns and retrieve all of it. So it's easy to mess it up if you don't quite understand what you're doing. Then, and that is true for pretty much every single vendor that is in the no-code space, because you're dealing with the audience, with the users who may not be very technical. Like, if you can do something in UI, if you can design this table, it should be good enough. It should just work. So it really is the responsibility of each and every vendor to educate their users on the best practices of how to structure your schema, how to establish relations, how to retrieve data. Like, for instance, we get this question very often. Backendless supports paging out of the box. It enforces paging. Like, whenever you make an API call to get data out of the database, we're restricted to 100 records. And if you want another 100 records, you basically use paging parameters to get the next set of data. And people come in and say, how do I load all the records? Well, you can cycle through and get it. But then you start asking questions like, why do you guys need to load all the records? Well, I want to show everything to my user. And then you ask the question, like, what happens when your table grows to hundreds of thousands of records? Do you want to show hundreds of thousands of records?
Yeah.
Your phone will blow up because it will not have enough memory to render it all. And then people start thinking, right? But this is a perfect example of thinking about scalability, or scalability being an afterthought. Okay, let's worry about loading data now. It's going to be fast, but you don't think about what's going to happen when your data set grows to be very large.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing though, right? Because so a lot of people, at least from my experience, they all come to you with an app idea, and they're like, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. Sure. It's going to be like, this is like, there should never be a person that doesn't use this app that we have. Like, it's just, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I have to be like, oh, well, no, but okay, right? So I commend them for you still have to have it niche. That's a whole marketing conversation. Sure. But I'm curious, how would you say, is it worth, here's my question, is it worth thinking through that possibility of, hey, our app goes viral and we blow up and it's scalable, or kind of just being like, you know what, we're going to do with what we have right now, and if we get to there, then we'll tackle that problem, or then we'll build our app on Bubble, and then we'll integrate with Backendless, because we might not need it. It might be too expensive for us up front. Like, maybe we can just deal with what we have. Like, how do you address concerns like that, or if someone was thinking in that line of thought? Like, I don't need to scale right away.
Sure. I think it is absolutely worth it. And the reason for this is because the delta of effort and time that needs to be put into that factor of your application development process is not significant. Okay, it basically, when you start from scratch, when you're just clean slate, and you just adopt the mentality that every single thing that we do, every single screen, every single data storage device or element, whether it's the file directory or table, needs to support the fact that it may grow to be very large. It really, what you change is the mindset. You start thinking about it differently. Then it really becomes part of the thought process that does not penalize you from how fast you can execute it. As a result, the benefit that you get is that what you come out with initially is going to be pretty darn close to what it needs to be when you are like fully polished and ready to scale. Because the opposite effect is that you say, okay, well, let's just forget about the fact that we may have millions of users. Let's forget about the fact that we may have millions of orders and the data collection that is responsible for orders. Let's just put something together quickly and launch it. If you have deep pockets and if you can afford more engineers and if time is not of a value, sure, launch it, but start working on something that that will be a rewrite. This will translate to extra cost. I have not run into a single company that would say cost doesn't matter. We can just afford what it never happens.
Yeah.
Small or large, cost matters. So I think everyone is universally interested in developing something that is not a throwaway code. So if you're doing it, if you basically have a team or you're doing it by yourself, do it right or as close as you can get to be right from the get-go.
No, it makes sense. I love what you said about mindset too. Like if you're really thinking how it can scale and get millions of users from the beginning, like that does something to you internally, like where you're really thinking about, hey, maybe this could be $1 million app or this could be $1 billion. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
really powerful. So
Absolutely.
one thing you said from your intro that I still want to ask you about, you mentioned about how you built Backendless and how you just kind of like you built it and you figured out to the point where you could get it to scale to like a really, really scalable thing. And then you said something along the lines of, well, and then we went and built the UI. Like that to me is super interesting because what I see when a lot of people who have app ideas is it's the opposite. They come to me with these nice, like, Canva built slides and like how all of this should work and feel. And because I feel like that's how a lot of people, like we all interact with apps that way. So we only see the client side of like, hey, like this is how cool like the DoorDash app works and the Uber app and the Snapchat app and like all these different things, but no one ever thinks about like the back end, how that actually functions, right? So do you recommend that for people who are building apps like this, is to actually just build something, even if it's ugly, and launch it and then go back and do UI, like user interface and be pretty? Okay,
No.
so tell me about that.
So there are two different things here. One is when you build an app, and the other is when you build a platform that powers up apps. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we talk to customers about building apps on top of Backendless or apps in general, it doesn't have to be on top of Backendless. Let's say you have an idea for an app. I'm a strong believer in the user experience first mentality. And what that means is that before you start doing any kind of architectural work, design of your the protocols, how data flows back and forth, and all the diagrams internally, how the entities relate to each other, like such as entity relationship diagrams that in most cases translates to your database schema. I believe that you need to figure out what that application will look like on the screen and get to as many details as you can, because in the grand scheme of things, whenever you will have competitors no matter what. If you are the only game in town, you're solving a problem that doesn't exist. So, and the differentiators will be user experience, how users react to your application, how quickly they can get things done. It will be price, it will be customer support, but with all other things being equal, it's going to be user experience. So figuring out user experience and figuring out what it's going to look like, I think must be first. So at that point of time, your UX engineer or expert that works in Figma, whatever, will be the most precious resource. Just figuring out what's the simplest way that is intuitive, where the users can get it, and getting those screens done. And then from there, you can identify, okay, well, these are the entities in the system. This is how they relate to each other. These are the interfaces that the data is going to be communicated from the UI to the backend, and you may have some additional processing and so on. So that is absolutely true when it comes to building apps. When it comes to building a platform such as us, such as ours, we said that we're going to create a backend first. But the purpose of that backend was to be a universal backend, the one that can be adapted to any kind of application. And that was a very challenging task. And I think we did quite well, because at this point, we don't have a particular niche for our customers. We have games running on top of backendless. We have mobile banks, universities creating their applications, line of business, marketplaces, you name it. It's a very wide range of different lines of businesses that have adapted backendless database and backendless system to satisfy the requirements. So when we said that we're going to work on the backend, it was really a backend that is universal, that does not solve a problem for one specific application, which was quite challenging, because here it's like, okay, we'll have to build a universal database, the one that can be adapted. How do we go about it? One system may have these requirements, another system may have other requirements. So identifying that kind of common denominator that is flexible enough to be adapted for different requirements was quite hard. But still, when one of the first things that we started doing when we were thinking about what that backend is going to be like is building UIs for the management console. So it's like the user experience first was still, true when we started working on it. It's just identifying like, what is that ideal user experience of logging into the system, and where they have to, define their schema and work with their file storage, or identify authentication mechanisms. How do they configure security? How do you create new role? How do you restrict that role from saying that you cannot, make updates in the database, or you can do retrieval and so on. So those are individual things that we had to figure out just on paper, really in the mock-up development tool first, and the implementation came later.
Sorry about that. My dog knocked my lamp down. No, that's very interesting. Yeah. Very, very cool. So let's switch gears a little bit. So where do you think the no code app development world is going in the future? Because you don't have to convince me. I'm all in with it. That's literally the business I have, right? And when I recognized it, I never learned to code. I still don't know how to code. I literally hire out people if I need custom code done, right?
Right.
So it's super interesting. Do you think it's leveled the playing field enough to make anyone an app developer? Or do you think that there's still a certain level of skill needed for it, certain ideas, certain things like that are needed for this? I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how all this is going to go in the future?
Well, I believe that some prerequisite knowledge is a must in order for someone to be efficient with app development, whether it's especially with code, and to a degree with no code. No code simplifies the process of expressing logic that needs to happen via some user interface facility. And for some no-code vendors and platforms, that user interface facility is just form-based, or you create kind of the sort of a mind map that connect various nodes to kind of describe the flow. In our case, we use a system that we call Codeless, which looks like a jigsaw puzzle where you basically connect pieces together. And it's based on a framework that was developed originally at MIT called Blockly. So we adapted Blockly for that. So no matter what it is, whether it's form-based, you're creating those kind of flow charts, or using Codeless, I believe the requirement is that whenever you express logic, you have to think algorithmically. Thinking algorithmically boils down to a couple of things. One of them, which is probably the most important, is being able to break down a problem into smaller problems. And then those smaller problems into even smaller problems until or not so much problems, but tasks, until you cannot break it down further. And by doing so, you really can come up with an algorithm. That algorithm may not be the most elegant because you may not recognize that there is a recursion somewhere, or you can take out some commonly executed parts of logic into a reusable function, for instance, or a reusable block of logic. That really comes with the experience. But being able to do that breakdown is one of the key assets that one may have to do it effectively. Ever since we entered the no-code game, we see a lot of people who struggle with that. They just do not, simply because there is just lack of education. They think that it's all UI. If it's UI, I can learn how to click buttons, right? But expressing logic, some people just have problem expressing logic. Like you ask, what does it need to do? Well, it needs to, click on the button, needs to send request. How do you compose this request? Does it need to check for security? Do you need to, make sure that it's formatted properly and so on? They just don't see those details. And of course, it's troublesome, right? They just will. Whenever someone works with no code, understanding how to solve problems algorithmically is going to be very, very important. On top of this, all the standard things that they teach in computer science, and they don't call it science for nothing. There's a reason it is a science. Understanding things such as data structures and how to do proper caching, how to structure your queries. And for that, you do not even need to know SQL, but you need to think about how do you retrieve data from the backend. Some solutions may provide an easier way to do it through the UI, where you can compose your query. Others may not, but still understanding all of that is important. And again, that's also another thing that is on the vendors, is to educate their users how to do this. Because I see a lot of people with various tools that because they come to us and use it as the backend. Like people, develop with all kinds of UI, no code systems, and they just don't have the basic knowledge. And I don't blame them. They could be, doctors or carpenters or plumbers or whoever. We're excited about the fact that they can build an app.
I mean, I was along that lines as well. When I started this, I was completely oblivious to all of this type of stuff. And it's really only been recently that my eyes have been opened to the sheer necessity in everything that you talk about. And it's interesting, they talk about, like, I remember when the big push was they were giving kids coding classes in high school or younger school and stuff. And maybe it's time there's even no code classes and education and things like that. Like you said, of logistical thinking, of
right,
building queries and that kind of stuff. Because I never learned any of that, like that would have been really useful.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, I see some curriculums that include, for instance, Lego Mindstorms. And Lego Mindstorms is just fantastic because it does include a system where you build logic. Like if sensor, sees obstacle, make a right turn, this kind of thing. And that is fantastic because the more people kind of, understand what happens algorithmically, the better off they will be in navigating this world, because, building micro apps is going to be something that pretty much every single thing that we use will have at some point.
Yeah.
Like you buy a toaster and it probably will have an app that says, if it's a slice of bread and, there is some sensor smelling smoke, pop it out, disconnect. Who knows, right? Yeah. It's not far-fetched at this point.
Interesting. Yeah. Toasters with apps.
Right. And the more people, can do this kind of thinking, the better off we will be.
For sure. Very cool. All right, Mark. Well, that's about all the time we got for today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This was really, really fun. Hope you guys got a lot out of this. There's so much to think about. Just like you said, I'm glad we had this conversation, especially about scalability, because that's not something that a lot of people think about up front. So this is very, very cool. So again, just one more quick plug there, Mark. Where can people go? I think you said it was backendless.com.
Backendless.com. If you're looking for me, let's say on LinkedIn, it is Mark Piller, Piller. I'm on Twitter at Codeless Coder. So there you have it. If you are looking for information on Backendless and you're just looking for ways to kind of start learning it, our YouTube channel has a bunch of videos. It is youtube.com/backendless. And when you log into Backendless, there's a system that is called Missions. That is kind of self-paced way to learn the platform. It is gamified. You get badges, you get points, you get sort of like our local own currency. So it is fun way to kind of learn what the system can do and how to use it.
Very cool. That's awesome. That's fun. Awesome. Well, thank you again for being a part of the Mobile Domination Show. We really appreciate you.
My
And
pleasure.
we'll definitely keep tabs on Backendless and see where things go.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, guys, that is all for this episode. Appreciate you all coming on and joining. Again, if you have not already, you can dive into the Mobile Domination app. I cannot say it is built with Backendless. We have not integrated it with that, but maybe we will in the future, and we will take that sucker to the moon, my friends. But anyway, that is all we got for you guys today. Be sure to check out backendless.com. It seems really, really cool. I've been looking into it a little bit myself, and it's just definitely worth exploring. So, all right, guys, appreciate you all. I will talk to you all next time. Have a great rest of your day.